This is my second encounter with a skinwalker. This happened when I was 10 in the winter of 2011 in Canada. The same thing I always say. The name Skinwalker was something I came up with after this encounter. I didn't know that skinwalkers were a thing at this point, and so my idea of a skinwalker and yours may be extremely different. Anyways, on to the story. My dad, thinking it would be cool, suggested that my entire family take a trip up to Canada to visit his brother, my uncle. My mom shot that shit down immediately, as it was the middle of winter and cold as fuck. My dad, who it is said can talk anyone into anything, anyone but my mom, got her to agree to him going. After Dad talked some more, he was able to take only one child with him. He could take the eldest child, a boy of 10, me. Mom wouldn't agree to anything else. A week went by, in which I assumed Dad got everything sorted out with Sirius, my uncle. My dad and I loaded into the car with our suitcases and started the multi-hour drive to our destination. This was my first time out of the country, and so I spent most of my time staring out the window. Before I knew it, we were stopping, safely at our destination. We must have crossed through a border check at some point, but I don't remember it. Our destination turned out to be a cabin in the middle of the woods, with no real civilization for miles. It was fucking fantastic. This remains my only time visiting Canada, but the woods were beautiful. I remember being awestruck by them. The trees were a different type than back in Michigan. Nature was loud with animals, and there were some bird calls I couldn't place. And the snow was deep, but seemingly untouched. I met Sirius and his family for the first time. The first 3 or 4 days were a blast, exploring my new surroundings and just having fun with the others. About halfway through our stay, Sirius said he wanted to show me how to shoot. My family isn't big on guns. Up until this point, I had never seen one in real life. My dad hesitantly said yes, as long as he promised that I wouldn't actually shoot the gun. So my uncle got his rifle and we went into the woods. I followed him as we walked, wondering how loud the gun would be. We hadn't gone far before we reached a fence that had cans on top of it. Sirius showed me all the parts of the gun, even unloading it so I could hold it. He showed me how to shoot, and I had a good time even though I wasn't shooting at the cans. An hour or two went by, and it started to snow. We decided to start heading back. I don't know how close we were to the cabin when I saw it. Over some brush, I saw what I thought was a deer standing on 2 legs. It was walking around. I went running towards it, all the memories of the previous year's running deer flooding into my head. Running deer was my first encounter with a creature like this. My uncle caught up with me and stopped me from going any closer. We just watched it for a bit. At first, it had its back turned toward us, and I could see it didn't have a tail. After a few moments, it turned. Its face was similar in some ways to the running deer's face. Ears too round, nose too short and pointed, and eyes too wide. But it was also different than the deer. For one, it was a moose, and those two animals don't look that much alike. But for another, it looked surprised. The deer had seen us, but no emotion at all ever crossed its face. But this moose looked shocked, like it had found 2 unknown creatures. I watched the moose with curiosity and wonder, while the moose looked at us with something in his eyes I couldn't place at the time. Years later, I saw that same look in another animal's eyes. It was a starving dog, guarding its kill from me as I walked by. That look was hunger. The moose started walking towards us. It didn't get 3 steps before a sound I had heard many times that day happened right next to me. A gunshot. The bullet hit a tree right behind the moose, and without a moment's hesitation, the moose turned and ran, faster than anything that size should be able to move. I had fallen over, ears ringing. I had been wearing earmuffs while my uncle was shooting earlier, but I had taken them off while we were walking back. The ringing gave way to a splitting headache. We continued on, and Sirius made me promise not to tell anyone anything that had just happened. Me being 10, as soon as I got back, I told my dad. Me and Sirius saw a moose. It was standing like a man, just like the deer. I remember my uncle saying something like,
"This kid's got one hell of an imagination."
and my dad just laughing. I've tried talking to Sirius about this. I tried just before writing this, in fact, but he always just avoids the subject. He even went as far as to hang up on me when I tried pushing for information earlier. About 8 years ago, I used to live in a converted garage in the back of my girlfriend's dad's house. The main house was kind of creepy, but the most creepy thing that I ever experienced before this night was that I heard footsteps in the house when no one was there. One night, I got home from work at about 10 p.m., and my girlfriend, who also worked late, wasn't home yet. So I got to the back house, unlocked, and went through the first set of doors, which opened up to the washroom, then went to open the next set of doors. And as I was pulling it open, it felt as if someone pulled the door closed. I freaked out and opened it again and felt resistance, but I gave it my all and opened it. What I saw was a black figure who had its arms and legs outstretched in sort of a defensive stance. The person looked to have weird arms and legs, like sort of oddly skinny. The torso and head looked like the right dimensions of a human, but the legs and arms were too long. It had no face or any other features. It looked almost blacker than black, where it almost sucked in light, so that I literally could only see the outline. I stepped back, and it ran inside the room onto my bed. The stance it took on my bed was really weird as well. It was almost like a wide push-up position. It had its hands and feet touching the bed, but nothing else. There was only one light, a ceiling fan in the center of the room, and though I was really freaked out, I had to see this person who was in my house. So I walked toward the center of the room, but as I was walking toward it, the thing was shaking my bed in that weird position, almost as a warning. The closer I got, the harder it shook my bed. I was almost to the light, and it was freaking out, literally pulling the top mattress up and down and making a ton of noise. At that point, I got too spooked and ran, shut the door, and stood in the backyard. So I walked over to the bushes that were kind of big near the wall of the house and just hid there, hoping to see the person exiting my place. I didn't want to go into the main house to get help because I didn't want it to leave my sight. The back house didn't have any windows at all, and the only exit and entrance were those doors. I stood there watching for what felt like an hour until my girlfriend's dad came out to say hi to me. I called him over and told him what happened. He went in the house, got a gun and a flashlight, and told me that we were going to go back in. We opened the first doors, looked around the washroom, and there was nothing. Walked through the second set of doors, and didn't find anything either. We turned on the light and looked everywhere, trying to make sense of how the person left, but couldn't figure it out. When we went in, we shut the doors, so it couldn't have left without us hearing it, and I had my eye on that entrance the entire time. The other thing that was weird was when it ran, I could hear the footsteps, but it never made a sound other than that. Since experiencing this, I've heard about shadow people, and everyone says that they don't make noise and can disappear. So I don't really know what that was for sure, but I think it was a shadow person. My now father-in-law tells me he believes me, but I think he and the rest of the family think I made it up or something, so I don't talk about it around them. Nothing else ever happened in that place, and I've never seen anything since. A little background. I was 26 at the time, 8 months pregnant, 5'5" and alone. Tom had always been friends with my friends throughout high school. He was the quiet art kid who had insane natural talent. He seemed nice enough, but despite always wearing a smile, he just gave people, girls mostly, the feeling that something was off with him. I never spent a lot of one-on-one time with him because of this, but I never had any reason to believe he was dangerous, just weird. Anyways, years after high school, I reconnected with my high school sweetheart, Jamie, who happens to be best friends with Tom. Everything was going great for Jamie and I. We were married, starting a family, remodeling an old family home on acres of land that was our own. The dream. Tom would visit regularly, and I'd become a staple at gatherings. He did have a weapons fascination, and liked to brag on himself, but nothing that made him seem threatening. Tom, by this time, had married a woman who was old enough to be our mothers. These two were not a healthy, cohesive couple, super codependent, and apparently they had gotten physical with one another. From what Tom had told us, though, she would flip and attack him. Not a great excuse. I still thought they both needed help. In the midst of this, though, Tom had started drinking and lying about it, getting 2 DWIs and showing up at our house drunk. Jamie told him to show up sober or don't come over at all. I was pregnant, and he didn't want that at our home. Months go by, no word from Tom. That is until one day he calls my husband wanting to chat. He sounds very depressed. I'm about 6 months along at this time. Jamie has him come by and they chat outside. He wants to leave his wife. Good for him. But something isn't right, even more so than normal. Jamie sneaks to Tom's scooter while Tom uses our restroom. You can drive one of these without a license here. We call them DWI mobiles. And Jamie sees a bottle of vodka. While Jamie is still outside, Tom all of a sudden doesn't have to use the restroom anymore. He turns to me and looks me up and down, so cold and expressionless.
You know, Jess, women are most beautiful when they're pregnant. You've never been more gorgeous.
He makes a move to get closer to me, but by this time Jamie is walking in and tells him to come outside, that they need to talk. Shortly afterwards, I hear Tom leave and Jamie tells me about the alcohol. I tell him about the creepy comment and we both agree that he can't be trusted. He was not welcome here until he got help. Tom stopped calling. No texts. Nothing. Jamie reached out to make sure he was okay. No response. From what we had heard from his family, he was okay. Just working and staying busy, trying to keep sober. We really hoped he was taking care of himself. Months later, and I am 8 months pregnant. I'm no longer working. Preterm labor. And Jamie works 6 days a week. That's a lot of time alone. His schedule was always the same and had not changed in years. Randomly, on a day Jamie was at work, Tom shows up at our house at 10 a.m. I usually napped around that time because I was huge and tired. Luckily, I was awake and in our front room. It has a huge window that faces our driveway, and the door leads to our garage. I shot him a nervous wave through the window. He didn't seem to see me and was grabbing something out of a duffel bag on his scooter. He pulled out a shotgun. I know there's fight or flight, but I just froze. He takes a swig of something, I'm guessing whiskey because of the bottle and the color, and suddenly notices me. Sheer horror on my face. In return, I get a hateful look. He says something I can't hear, and then smiles, and not a happy smile. He then packs up his gun and leaves. I immediately called Jamie. He didn't answer. I'm texting, totally freaked out, and checking locks. Jamie calls back about 10 minutes later. As we're talking, trying to make sense of what just happened, Jamie's dad, who lives just down the road, calls. Tom tried to break into his home. Thankfully, Jamie's dad is always armed. He caught him red-handed but doesn't call the cops because of their long-standing friendship with Tom's family and the fact that they had bailed my husband out as a wild teenager. Apparently, he hadn't had his gun out when he caught him, so he didn't feel threatened. Not happy about that, but it wasn't my choice. That alone was scary and super confusing, but what Jamie told me later really freaked me out. When I was working, I worked a set schedule except for occasionally I'd be called in. One day, a month prior to my incident, Jamie called in sick and I was called in to work. I hated leaving him sick, but duty called. Jamie said he had been napping a little after 9 due to a high fever. He had awoken at some point to the sound of doors opening and closing, but he was so out of it he figured it must have been his imagination. Fever dreams are wild. What woke him up and kept him at least semi-alert, though, was the bell on the bedroom door. Our dog jingles it to potty in the morning, and FYI, this dog is overly friendly. He'd be the dog to show an intruder to the most valuable stuff to steal. He heard it jingle twice, lightly. He vaguely remembers looking up and seeing what looked like Tom at the end of the bed staring at him, not moving, but then he passed back out. A little bit later he came to, and Tom was gone. So Jamie figured it was just the fever messing with him. He wasn't so sure anymore. It's been over 2 years, and we make no attempts to talk to Tom. He used to drive by from time to time, but never tried to make contact. That has stopped, but I still make sure all of my locks and windows are secure. And Tom, I don't ever want to see you again. When I was in high school, we had this amazing world history teacher. I'll call him Mr. Newton for privacy's sake. The reason why everyone liked him so much and wanted to be in his class was that he was an incredible storyteller. For further reasoning, his stories were all based upon personal and true accounts. He had a couple of stories that I actually plan on posting here, so keep an eye out for the second one in a little while. This particular story had me walking out of the classroom in tears, so here's how it goes. When Mr. Newton was a little boy, around the age of 7 or 8 years old, he had an older brother who'd just started college. Since Mr. Newton's family lived in Montana, his older brother decided to go to a nearby college, so he was still able to be by his family. Well, late one night, around 2 in the morning, the phone rings in the house. Mr. Newton remembers this well, because he remembers waking up not to the phone ringing, but to his parents quickly going down the hall to get to the phone. Since the call was so late, they knew that something must be wrong. It turned out to be their son who was in college, and this is what transpired over the phone. Their son was crying so hard that they stayed on the phone with him for over an hour, trying to get the whole scenario out of him. This is what he had told them. Mr. Newton's brother had decided to go to a party with a friend around 9. The house that the party was being held at was on the opposite side of the lake from where their dorms were located. His friend had an old beat-up truck and had managed to talk Mr. Newton's brother into going with him. At around midnight, they decided it was time to head back to the dorms. Now the lake was pretty large in scale, and it took a good 15 to 20 minutes to drive all the way around it to get back home. So the friend was driving, and Mr. Newton's brother was sitting in the passenger seat. That side was closest to the shore of the lake. As they were about halfway there, his friend makes a comment, saying that there was something up ahead by the road. As they're both looking at this thing, they're so far away that it looks like it might be a cat, so his friend starts to speed up in an attempt to hit it. But as they get closer, he quickly slows back down. It was bigger than a cat. If you live in a highly wildlife-populated state such as Montana, and there seems to be something larger than a cat on the side of the road, that most likely means a deer in a damaged vehicle. So as they slow down, they're both leaning forward in their seats, trying to get a good look at the thing. Its eyes reflected off of the headlights, but it was not a deer. They finally get close enough to where the creature's body begins to take shape. It looked like a child. Just on the side of the road near the lake, a short, humanoid figure was standing there facing the road. But there was something wrong. Not just the fact that it was possibly a child standing on the side of the road at nearly 1 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, but they started to notice its clothes. They were about 10 yards from it by this point. He looked like he had walked out of the 1800s. He was wearing a long black coat that was so long it slumped down past his feet, dragging in the grass, and he had on a top hat. They were both trying to figure out what the hell this thing was, and they got to the point where they were both staring right at its face as they were passing it. And what they saw had his friend hitting the gas pedal with all his might, cursing and screaming. Its face was old, like a 100-year-old man's face might look. His skin was sagging down unnaturally, but his eyes were too big for his face, and they were jet black, like a shark's eyes. He just stared at them as they passed. So they're hauling ass, and it gets worse. It started chasing them. Not in the way you would think, though. As they pass by it, its head follows the direction of the truck, turning almost like an owl's head would turn. But it wasn't actually running. It was bounding in these disgustingly large leaps, but its head is still twisted around. His friend is screaming to get the gun out of the back, but before Mr. Newton's brother can even start to look for it, the thing is gone. As soon as they got home, he had called his parents bawling. He never saw it again, but his brother didn't drive at night in that area anymore. Anyone ever heard of this kind of creature in Montana, or just in general? I've always been curious about it. I live in Florida, and this incident happened about 3 weeks after Hurricane Irma, so not that long ago. Back in July, the ex and I had finalized our divorce, and I moved into a gated neighborhood where every house was rented out by the same rental company. It's a very small neighborhood with about 15 houses tops. All the houses are around a man-made lake, with the backyards pushed up against it. No one really has a fenced backyard. When you walk out your back door, you see the lake in front of you, and your neighbors' backyards on each side of you. Everyone in the neighborhood seemed very close. Someone was always hosting a family-friendly party or barbecue, or having people over to watch sports. I was and am still depressed about my divorce, so I never partook in these social gatherings. The only person I got to know was my next-door neighbor, Steve, an active Navy soldier with a huge love for guns. Steve is the true hero in this nightmare. My daughter, Alice, is 4 years old, and I get her every weekend. Alice's bedroom window faces the backyard towards the lake. I spoil that girl to death. She truly is my everything, and I count down the days to the weekend every week just to be with her. That's why I was upset when Irma came, and I had to go almost 3 weekends without seeing her. The weekend before the storm, she was with her mom. Then obviously the weekend of the storm, she was with her mom. Then on top of that, the weekend after she had to be with her mom because my power was still out. No AC in Florida is miserable. The humidity was so bad that week that I slept in my daughter's room the whole time. She is the only room with a window that faced the lake. I opened the window, exposing just the screen, so the wind from the lake could cool the room as much as possible while I slept. Eventually the power comes back, and Alice starts visiting me again like normal. That was when the nightmares started. My daughter would complain about the singing lady, and how she doesn't like her anymore. I thought maybe she was referring to one of my ex's friends, or one of the teachers at her school. Maybe there was a teacher that sang to the kids that she didn't like. That Saturday, Alice woke up in the middle of the night screaming bloody murder. I ran into her room and turned on the light and found her hiding under her covers. I asked her what was wrong, and all she could do was point to an empty corner of her room and say, "Look! Look!" There was nothing there. She was acting as if she saw a ghost. After I calmed her down, she started to talk to me about the singing lady again. "Please tell the singing lady not to come back. Please, Daddy. Make her go away." Obviously, she's having nightmares, right? I showed her there was nothing in the closet and nothing under the bed, and that there was nothing to be afraid of. She calmed down and went back to sleep. I went back to my room and passed out. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes before Alice comes running into my room screaming, "She's back! She's back!" Alice absolutely refused to go back to her room, so I let her sleep with me. The next morning, Sunday morning, I took Alice out to breakfast, and we stopped by Target to pick up a baby monitor. I haven't used one since her mom and I were still married, but I wanted to easily be able to hear her if and when she started to have these nightmares again, so I could respond quicker. After I set them up, I showed Alice how they worked, to give her assurance that I could hear her and she was safe. That night she slept soundly and didn't make a peep. The following weekend, Alice had to stay with her mother again because she caught a stomach virus from one of her little friends at school. It was Saturday night and I was sound asleep in my bed. Around 2 a.m. is when I heard it. A woman's voice, humming a soft nursery rhyme through the baby monitor. The humming or soft singing got louder and clearer as the voice got closer to the monitor. I wasn't dreaming. I could hear a woman singing lullabies in my daughter's bedroom. I had never been so scared and dumbfounded in my life. I was feeling a mixture of pure terror and disbelief. Then the voice spoke out. "Alice, sweetie, are you awake?" Adrenaline shot through my veins. I jumped out of bed and locked my bedroom door. I picked up my cell and called Steve, the neighbor. He didn't waste a second. As soon as I got off the phone with him, I heard him storming out his back door, screaming,
"Don't you fucking move!"
I ran outside and found him aiming his shotgun at a woman crouched outside my daughter's window, the one I had left open after Irma and never closed. Steve quickly dropped his guard when he recognized the woman. It was Jean, the neighborhood maintenance lady. Steve's wife came running out after him and confirmed it was her. Jean played dumb, said she was not singing and didn't even know my daughter's name. She said she was near my daughter's window because she was doing her weekly patrol for gators and thought she saw one approaching our house from the lake. Bull fucking shit. She was singing, and she called out to my daughter by name. Yes, it's true that there have been a few gators spotted around the neighborhood, and yes, it was Jean's job to patrol the lake every now and then, but at 2 a.m., I obviously knew it was bullshit, and even though neither Steve or his wife called her out on it, I could tell from the look on their faces that they didn't believe her either. The next morning, I went over to Steve's house to thank him and tell him exactly what happened. He told me that Jean and her husband have been known to be a little cuckoo, but this is by far the craziest thing to happen. Steve helped me install metal bars on Alice's window that afternoon. I was coming home from work the other day, and as I was pulling up to my house, I noticed my bedroom light is on. I'm pretty sure I left it off, but maybe I didn't. I go in, and as I was climbing up the stairs, I noticed the bedroom door is closed, which is odd because I never leave it closed, even when I'm sleeping. At this point, I thought somebody must have broken in, and I quickly grabbed my dad's shotgun and decided to confront the guy. I opened the door, and sure enough, the light's still on, but I can't see anyone anywhere. There's not many places to hide, besides maybe under the bed, which I checked. Not finding anything, I decided to call it a day. I'm tired as hell. Later, I was watching TV and fell asleep on the couch, but I was woken up by a noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like somebody was trying to quietly walk around. I grab the gun and shout to whoever is up there to step out of the door with their hands up. I quietly make my way up the stairs to find the bedroom light on again. I distinctly remember switching it off. I go into the guest bedroom and find no one. Same thing with the bathroom. I head downstairs thinking maybe I was starting to lose it, and I hear the footsteps again. I was positive it sounded like a heavy-set man walking along the floor, so I quickly ran down the stairs to call the cops. At that moment, I hear a door slam, and at this point I'm scared shitless. I run out of the house, grabbing my keys to head down to my friend's house, not wanting to stay in this one another damn minute. As I was pulling out into the road, I glance up to my bedroom window to see the light on again, and a faint silhouette of a man standing at the window just staring outside. The cops arrived 15 minutes later and said there was no sign of forced entry or anybody in the house. No way I'm going back though. The next morning I grabbed my things and moved in with my buddy till I figure out what the hell is happening. Nobody besides me has a key to that house. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. Come follow me on Instagram and Twitter at CoreyRhino. Be good to animals, even people. See ya. And now here's a word from our sponsor this week. Hey, how y'all doing? Come on down to Bullseye Shooting Range, the only range in the United States. Made for blind people. Whatever kind of blind you are, you're welcome here. Full-on blind, color blind, snow blind, window blinds, and a blind rage. You see, around here, you might not have your sight, but you could do that thing you love more than anything, shooting guns. And if you have family or friends that want to come but they're scared, I got a little secret for them, so don't listen for a second. Scout's honor now. Don't worry, they're all blanks. Okay, now here we are at our archery section. It just opened up. Oh, damn, you're alright, Donnie? Looks like it just closed, too. Hold on. Hey, Beverly. Beverly, over here. Will you do me a favor and turn around 180 degrees? Okay. There you go, honey. Anyway, what the hell y'all waiting on? Get your ass down here to Bullseye shooting range and fire off some rounds.
Scout, snämma, Bergsbus, Rish.